when in the late 90s I was researching Eleanor of Aquitaine, and it was very frustrating because the nature of medieval biography, particularly of women, is you're piecing together fragments of information, and there are tantalising gaps that perhaps we will never fill. And it came to me that the only way one could fill gaps in her story would be to write it as fiction. And I'd written historical fiction, not very good historical fiction, when I was much younger as part of many historical projects which I did just for fun. And I thought, well, I'm going to have a bash at trying to write a historical novel just for fun. And I thought, I can't write about Eleanor because I don't want to influence the historical biography. So I thought I'd choose a subject, Lady Jane Grey. She didn't live very long. It's not a long story, but it's a fascinating one that always gripped me. And so I wrote this novel called Light After the Darkness, one of Lady Jane Grey's own quotes. I was rather pleased with it when I finished it. I did it in 2 months. And I sent it off to my agent, and he said, riveting story, but it reads like faction. You've got to come off the fence, stop being a historian, and start being a novelist, because I'd rather rammed all the facts home at the beginning of the novel rather than putting them in seamlessly. And so I put it away in a drawer and forgot about it. And then I was also told historical fiction based on real characters wasn't selling very well at that time. This is late 90s. And then, of course, publishing sensation The Other Boleyn Girl came out in 2000. And I thought, oh, I could get my novel out again. So I got it out again and had a look at it and rewrote it. First person, present tense, with 16 narrators, which was later edited down to 8. And which made it a darker book because you lost some of the more humorous voices. And that was the book that was put forward to Hutchinson by my agent, and that's how I got into writing fiction. There are several reasons, I think, and that's because this is a very dramatic period in history, one of the most dramatic periods in history. This is a dynasty of larger-than-life characters, and for the first time in our history, because of the source material, we can know these characters as we've never been able to know monarchs that went before them. Because it's an age that sees the spread of literacy, the growth of diplomacy, and the development of portraiture. We've got the great Hans Holbein, we've got Lucas Hornbu, and we've got Hans Ewert, Marcus Geerarts, and you go through the period, but you can see, for the first time, we can see realistic portraits of an English king and his court, say with Hans Holbein of Henry VIII. And so Henry VIII's matrimonial adventures brought the royal marriage into focus for the first time in history, in our history. And because of that, no piece of gossip was considered too insignificant to be reported. So we've got this wealth of evidence on the private lives of monarchs, which we don't have for the medieval period. And we've got the source material is a wealth. Go back 50 years to, say, Richard III's time, and there's a paucity of it. Things have changed that much in that period. But also, it's an age of great magnificence and conspicuous display. And we've got the remnants of amazing, beautiful palaces. Hampton Court, for example, which has got is the best preserved of Henry's 70-odd houses. And it's also an age of great magnificence in dress. The portraits show the dress, the sumptuousness of it. So I think all these reasons combine, and this is why the Tudor period is so fascinating. You couldn't make it up. A king with 6 wives who beheads 2 of them, a 17-year-old girl, Lady Jane Grey, who's queen for 9 days and gets her head chopped off, Bloody Mary sending martyrs to the stake, and Elizabeth I succeeding to a bankrupt kingdom in 1558, and she's still there 45 years later. It's a wonderful story, it really is. I think I would say that she's been overshadowed more by Anne Boleyn, because I think we've seen in the last 15 years a cult of celebrity grow up around Anne Boleyn. She's become very controversial, very high profile. It's almost as if everybody's projecting their own vision onto Anne Boleyn and what they want her to be. And Catherine's been rather sort of sidelined, even though she was queen for far longer. Anne represents the new. She represents the exciting, the dangerous. Catherine is the old order. You can see why there is this comparison, why Catherine loses out. But I mean, look more closely at the source material. I started off as a young historian seeing Anne Boleyn as a very romanticised figure, and she is in the broadest sense if you think of romantic literature. But look closely at the source material and you will see a woman who is not a very nice person. That's how I would read her from the sources. But of course, she probably had her reasons for behaving the way she did, but she was quite ruthless. And she would have had Katherine on the scaffold, and Mary, if she'd had her way. A medieval queen was supposed to be the very mirror of the Virgin Mary and to reflect all the virtues that the Virgin Mary had, particularly motherhood and charity and piety and virtue. And Henry VIII's own mother, Elizabeth of York, had that in spades. She was the perfect medieval queen. But of course the other aspect was fruitfulness, was bearing heirs. Elizabeth of York succeeded in that. Katherine of Aragon did not. But she conformed to Henry's ideal, this ideal that had grown up over the medieval centuries of what a queen should be. Compare that with Anne Boleyn, who comes along. She's a religious radical. She is considered to be a whore and very loose of morals. You read that the state papers are littered with slanders and libels against her, and the government had to punish the people who did it. I mean, increasingly this became a problem. She was hated. She was very unpopular. And you've got someone here who has got a bad reputation. Now, kings did not marry queens with bad reputations. That's why Anne Boleyn's scandalous in the first place. She supplanted a very popular queen who was perceived in nearly every respect to be a success. And she also was a great reformist. A lot of people thought she was a Protestant, which she wasn't. But also, she's considered to be very controversial in that respect. And then, of course, 3 years after her marriage, she's beheaded amidst claims of adultery, treason, and plotting the king's death, incest. And that, I mean, they threw everything at her they could have done. And surprisingly enough, I mean, I think she was innocent, and I think she was framed. That one image of Anne in the Tower, her courage on the scaffold, overlays everything that went before. It's very hard to assess Anne Boleyn objectively. So that's why she's such a radical. And after, Jane Seymour's in the mould of Katherine of Aragon, but the time has gone by. The Virgin Mary's being phased out because of the Reformation, and so we've lost that ethos of the perfect medieval queen. Well, this isn't just about their periods of queenship, because if it was Anne of Cleves it would be a very short book because she lasted 6 months. It's about whole lives, and to reconstruct those whole lives I've looked for clues in the evidence that we have, and I've got very interesting backstories, particularly for Anne of Cleves, because there's a comment Henry made on their wedding night that rather gives it away, and nobody's picked up on it. I've actually got a series of 4 non-fiction books for Jonathan Cape that I'm not allowed to announce at the moment. They're waiting until the publication of the Katherine of Aragon has sort of a little bit behind us, and they'll be announced later this year. And if you're asking how I'm going to manage writing 10 books in 6 or 7 years, it's only because I've done a lot of research, and I'm building on that research.